And again today, it was the Washington Post that was out with another bombshell report. Quoting from the Washington Post headline tonight, quote, Trump asked intelligence chiefs to push back against FBI collusion probe after Comey revealed its existence. This report says back in March, quote, Trump made separate appeals to the Director of National Intelligence, former Senator Dan Coats, and to Admiral Michael S. Rogers, the Director of the National Security Agency, urging them to publicly deny the existence of any evidence of collusion during the 2016 election. The report goes on. The new revelations add to a growing body of evidence that Trump sought to co-opt and then undermine Comey before he fired him May 9th. Connecticut's senior senator, also that state's former attorney general, added this point.
It adds additional mounting powerful evidence of a cover-up and obstruction of justice. And what is really significant about it is that it's cumulative on the issue of intent, because Donald Trump's defenders have said he really didn't mean any harm when he pressured Comey, or he didn't mean what he said. But this repeated attempt to stifle investigative work, stop the truth from coming out, eventually becomes evidence of intent. All of it mounting evidence of powerful, undeniable dimensions, and it goes to the issue of intent.
Again, that was part of the news that went into this day, and earlier today we learned Mike Flynn will invoke the Fifth Amendment in response to a subpoena requesting documents about his ties and contacts with Russia. We're going to talk more about this a little later on. Flynn was also accused in a letter today from Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland of lying to security clearance investigators back in 2016 about being paid by Russian media. Those payments were for an appearance at a now well-chronicled dinner honoring Vladimir Putin in December of 2015 for RT, Russian television. Here with us tonight to discuss it, Eli Stokols, Wall Street Journal White House correspondent, Indira Lakshmanan, Boston Globe, Washington columnist, and ethics chair at the Poynter Institute, and Politico senior foreign affairs correspondent Michael Crowley. Well, where to begin? Michael, you'll get the first question tonight. What just happened today?
Well, Brian, it's another log on the fire. I assume we're talking here about the latest reports, and particularly this Washington Post report as opposed to Manchester. Yeah. And what it does is, you know, just build out, as if we needed any more evidence, that this president doesn't seem to respect or care about the traditional boundaries that should limit him, that should restrict him from an ongoing investigation at a minimum. I mean, I think the most charitable thing you can say when you read this story is that Donald Trump is a very wealthy man who's used to picking up the phone and getting things done in New York City and in his real estate deals, and he thinks that that works in the federal government, even when it applies to a federal investigation that involves possible nefarious influence by a foreign power. But then you see, you know, Senator Blumenthal, I think, put this well. You start to see the intent in particular, Brian, I think somewhat buried in that story below the lead, which describes Trump asking two senior intelligence officials to come out and essentially say he's not under investigation and to clear him. Other White House officials who are not named in the story apparently made inquiries about getting those intelligence officials to pressure Comey, the FBI director, now fired, to drop his investigation into Michael Flynn. And there's really no way to explain that away. So in the first case, Trump could be a really rich guy who thinks, hey, I have this sense that I'm not under investigation. Why won't more people come out and say so? He shouldn't be making those phone calls. It's inappropriate. It's crossing into lanes he shouldn't be in. So, but maybe you could explain that away. But that second part of it, Brian, I think is very troubling. If White House officials are leaning on people in the federal government saying, go to Comey, get him to drop those charges, that screams obstruction of justice to me.
And Eli, if news stories in fine newspapers and publications like yours were allowed to speak English in their first draft, they'd have the conversation people like us are able to have. If true, this story means that Donald Trump, as president, was going around to people in government saying either make this go away or tell the folks that I'm cleared, tell folks everything's fine.
Yeah, it's another whoa if true story, although, you know, the thing about newspapers is that we don't generally have a habit of printing things that are not true. They source these things. They have sources deep inside these intelligence agencies, and you are starting to see a pattern with these stories documenting the same behavior over and over and over again. And when they come back to the White House, you saw it again today, there is no denial of the allegations in the story. Today, the White House said something like, oh, we're not even going to talk about it because it's based on unnamed sources. Before, they were defending, they were trying to say, well, I didn't do this, and the thing they were saying they didn't do wasn't actually alleged in the story. They've yet to deny any of these allegations that he pressured Comey or that he pressured the two other intelligence officials that the Washington Post reported tonight, and that a lot of other newspapers and news outlets very quickly confirmed on their own. There are a lot of sources across what Donald Trump might like to think of as the deep state. That's our government. That's the intelligence community. This is a community of people who are bound together by their belief in and respect for the rule of law. And it doesn't matter to them if this is an executive in the Oval Office, the President of the United States. If it's someone who doesn't seem to have a respect for the rule of law, you can understand why there are so many damaging leaks, and we probably haven't seen the end of them.
Eli, it's been said Donald Trump was not a traditional CEO in that he didn't have a board to report to. And it's been said with great frequency today, over and over again. Here's a guy who had one way of doing things in his world. It was the only world he knew. Not only is the mindset of a good government type foreign to him, but he thought he could pull the levers of democracy and make it work for him. Is this really the learning curve of someone from the business world now in the Oval Office?
Well, it's not the learning curve of anyone from the business world who might have, won the Oval Office, but it certainly is that way for this executive, for Donald Trump, a person who's really never had to answer for anyone, who's 70 years old, has always surrounded himself with a sort of coterie of yes men and women, people who never questioned him, who got things done for him, who always sort of looked the other way on ethical things, legal things. They just sort of fudged it. And you can't do that when you're in a system, of government. You have all these checks and balances and a federal bureaucracy with thousands and thousands of people who can be checks on your power themselves because they have access to this information. I think it's interesting. This happened back in March. This was the same time, if the story is true, the same time that he was saying these things and trying to pressure these senior intelligence officials to end these investigations, pressuring Comey. At the same time, he was tweeting about President Obama tapping his wires, that he got the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, to go around and sort of try to stand up that story and convince the media that the president might be onto something. All of this was happening when they thought they could just sort of manufacture their own version of truth back in March. Now we hear of, it's May, we hear of the president, his advisors, his legal team telling him, you have to be a little more judicious and discreet with your words. You can't just say things. You have to be a little more bound by the facts. He's never tried to do that, and it may be too late. Even if they sort of make headway and he changes his behavior now, he may have already done too much and said too much, in terms of allowing people to make a case for obstruction of justice.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.